Let's jump into Chapter 3. How do I manage performance to unlock our full potential? Now this specific chapter assumes a certain amount of knowledge about metrics and about performance management, and so this video will be a little bit longer because I'll be explaining a bit more about the background of performance management and how it operates. So performance management actually matters. Otherwise, we wouldn't be discussing it. To introduce this, the book uses this quote from Meaney: "Any business or industry that pays equal rewards to its goof-offs and eager beavers, sooner or later will find itself with more goof-offs than eager beavers." The point of performance management is to create and incentivize eager beavers and to disincentivize behavior that is more like goofing off. Now that seems obvious at first, but actually implementing performance management is quite difficult. But this is something that leaders recognize is important. 94% of leaders recognize this. And beyond this, those organizations that effectively implement performance management have higher productivity. They have above median profits. Being good at performance management translates into results. And this is what managers recognize. Let's walk through a little bit of the background of performance management. This is the framework that was used in the text. Not much background was provided on it, and so what I wanted to do is walk through each step of the cycle so that you get a feel for exactly how performance management should work. The first step, starting at the top, with alignment and meaning. With alignment, what we mean by alignment is aligning the company's goals and objectives with the employees' goals and objectives. It's making it so that the employee's work directly contributes to the mission of the organization. And tied closely to that is meaning. Are you engaged? Do you feel like your work is meaningful? Do you find it validating? Do you enjoy it? And so once the employee is aligned and ideally finds meaning in that work and they're dedicated and they're into it, great, we've achieved step one. At that point, we can empower the employee and allow the employee to make decisions so that they can achieve great things, so that they can become high performers. We're not micromanaging those underneath us. We're allowing them to make mistakes and also to succeed. Along with that, we provide the transparency of letting employees know frequently how they're doing. You're doing quite well. Look at these fantastic accomplishments you've made. However, there's still room to improve, to increase your strengths even further, or maybe to shore up a couple critical weaknesses. And so we can say, okay, you're doing an A-. So how can this employee actually excel and reach, go from 90th percentile to 99th percentile or above? Well, they're going to need development and support. And that's what Chapter 2 was all about, the 70-20-10 framework. Providing the mentoring, the on-the-job training, and the support so that they can achieve greatness, so that they can become star players. Finally, once alignment and meaning, we've empowered and there's transparency, we have development and support, and so they're knocking it out of the park, they're doing fantastic, and so we get to motivation and fairness. And so we have this high-performing employee is doing all of these steps. They're engaged, they're aligned, empowered, they know how they're doing, they have development and support. So in the end, what are they directly benefiting from? For example, is the pay, are the non-financial incentives there in place, like the standing ovation bunny, to allow them to be recognized? And is the system fundamentally fair? Does it actually link to performance, or does it not link to performance? Does it link to, say, seniority rather than performance? Or does it link to, say, how good you can play the political game at work rather than actual productivity? So each step needs to work properly. The alignment and meaning has to happen, empowerment, transparency, development, support, motivation, and fairness, and then getting back to alignment and meaning once again. And as we go through this cycle, if every step is working, then performance management is functioning as it should. It's aligning what you're doing with the organization and giving you everything you need to in order to succeed and to thrive. Everybody's winning. But it can break down at any step along the process. And if it breaks down at any one step, the entire performance management system can essentially become mostly worthless. So to begin with, alignment. Now imagine with alignment that the The mission of the organization is unclear. Maybe it's written down on paper, but it's not transmitted through the culture or values of the company. It's unclear how what you do relates to the overall goals of the organizations. Now, maybe there's that alignment, but it's very difficult to get buy-in for the meaning of what they're trying to accomplish and what those teams are trying to accomplish. Perhaps an employee is not empowered to make the right decisions and to succeed. And so it's just you are on your track. There's only one path that you can walk down, and that's end of story. And so when you get to the transparency section, you don't find the evaluations meaningful because it doesn't feel like you can actually change the result. But then within transparency, if you don't know how you're doing and it's all a guess, I mean, there are organizations, for example, that you have employees walking into their performance management sessions and say they give their employees an A, B, or C, and walking into it, say an employee might think, I don't know if I'm going to be getting a C or an A. They have no idea where they stand and haven't known that for the last 364 days. The transparency fundamentally isn't there. And perhaps the organization is lacking the development and support so that the employee feels like, okay, I'm not an A-plus player. I want to be, but I'm not, and I have no idea how to get there. And so this employee is not performing well over and over and over, and it's demoralizing, and they're not able to get out of the rut that they're in, and they're not able to improve even though they want to. Which then links to motivation and fairness. If the system, as from the previous example, from the previous slide, if the system's not fair, then people will be demotivated. If you see, well, linking back to our quote at the very beginning, if the goof-offs are being treated the same way as the eager beavers, it's going to be demotivating for the eager beavers. They're going to end up leaving, as we discussed in previous chapters. Also, a lot of the intrinsic motivations of driving not just with money but non-financial incentives is critically important because that links directly to meaning. Do you find meaning in your work? Work directly links to intrinsic motivation. One example that I like is an acquaintance of mine. He worked for a big tech company, and they had a major failure over a weekend, like major failure. And so what he does, he comes in on a Saturday afternoon, works 20 hours straight, so he's up at 30 hours straight at that point, pulls a rabbit out of a hat, rescues basically the infrastructure of the firm so that they can be up and running by Monday morning. And as a result of this, they said, great job, that was amazing, here is $100 gift card. And all he could think of was, that's $5 an hour. He said he would have much preferred to have the right to wear flip-flops to work like he's always wanted to than a $100 gift card. It didn't mean anything to him. In fact, it was demotivating rather than motivating. And so the motivation and fairness has to be done in the right way and at the right time. So these 4 steps of the cycle are oftentimes simplified into 4 different questions. And these 4 different questions, they don't exactly capture each of the steps, but it simplifies the process to capture the main essence of those steps. And so we start out with, what am I supposed to achieve? It's that meaning and alignment. As an employee, what am I supposed to achieve? And then, how am I doing? Instead of just transparency and empowerment, if you're not empowered and if there's not that transparency, then you either don't care how you're doing or you don't know how you're doing. From that point, how can I improve? You can be developed and supported to improve. And in the end, what will this mean for me? How will I be recognized? Will the system be fair? Will I be rewarded for this great work that I'm doing at aligning my work with the company's objectives and continually improving? So how is performance management going? If you are part of most organizations out there, you could probably have a decent guess that 29% of employees don't believe performance management effectively supports the delivery of business objectives within their organization. And it just falls flat in a majority of organizations that are out there. On top of that, 8% of employees believe their managers are good at this evaluation process and are fair and equitable. Now, that's a very important fact, because a key aspect of performance management is that it needs to be scaled across your entire organization. Your organization might have thousands or tens of thousands of managers, maybe even hundreds of thousands of managers in an organization large enough. You have all of these managers, and they need to be able to support, develop, align. They need to do all of those steps for their employees that work under them. And they need to do this in a way that's motivating, that's fair, that's equitable. It's very difficult to scale the correct culture of performance management across an organization, which is why most people believe that it's being done wrong. It's difficult to do because it has to be scaled across many people, not just a small team. Corollary to that is that 89% of employees believe their performance would improve if performance management improved. Oftentimes because they don't really think it's fair. So you take, okay, this is performance management. Well, think of all of the time dedicated to performance management. Your annual review, your semi-annual review. There are many employees, usually within HR, that are just dedicated to performance management and its structure. You have software related to performance management that you're licensing from a third-party company. You're dedicating thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of hours potentially to this entire process. And what are you getting out of this? So managers believe it's very important. Those who do it well succeed. It's hard to do well, and a lot of time and money is being sunk into it. So I wanted to provide a little bit more background on business metrics. Now, business metrics, you're familiar with these. So you need to reach a certain sales goal. You need to reach a certain customer satisfaction score. You need to reach A, B, C, X, Y, Z, cost savings, EBITDA, cash flow, whatever it might be. Now, ideal metrics have three attributes. The first is that they're directly related to the organization's mission. And second, linked to that, is that they are difficult to gain. Now, the first step is it's alignment. It's what we've already discussed. But one problem with metrics is that they are difficult. When they're difficult to gain, that means they consistently directly relate to the organization's mission. However, if they're being gamed, we start steering away from this target of the reason for why we've established these metrics in the first place. And that's a constant struggle within organizations. And the third is more important than people realize, which is that ideal metrics are easy to measure or collect. Now, you don't want to create metrics where your employees are spending 20 to 30% of their time fretting and collecting data on them and dolling them up and putting them together for presentation. You want your employees spending time on actual value-added projects, driving value for the consumer, driving value for the end customer. You don't want them spending all their time just collecting, measuring, collecting, measuring, collecting, measuring. Now, because of these three attributes, ideal metrics can be pretty difficult to attain. Now, take one example of a surgery. So with surgeries, a few years ago, there was this idea of, well, if we release surgeon success rates, then we're going to have transparency. And these surgeons, well, they're going to perform better because they're under pressure. They need to perform. This will be great. Well, what happened was that surgeons were less willing to take difficult cases and very difficult surgeries because it would hurt their numbers. And that has a detrimental effect on the health effects for the end patient. Another example is, say, a procurement department. There are examples where a procurement department, they're trying to reduce costs in your organization and fulfill the needs of your organization of what they need to purchase very quickly, seamlessly, provide excellent service. But one of the natures of procurement organizations is that many of these attributes of what they're trying to deliver to the rest of the organization so that they can function as they should, they're very difficult to measure. And so what you'll see is many procurement organizations get stuck with, oh, was this a cost savings? Was this a cost avoidance? And spending an inordinate amount of time trying to measure the score of procurement rather than actually delivering services. This is a constant challenge. So because of this, ideal metrics are rare. They're easy to come up with, and then you implement them, and then they don't work out the way they should because they fail on one of these three attributes. So because of this, metrics are still very, very, very important, but because they tend to fail, and because they tend to have holes in them because they're either difficult to game or they potentially do not relate to the organization's mission, it's critical for that management level, all of those supervisors, develop this culture of performance improvement that we've discussed for previous chapters, this culture of iteration rather than repetition. How can we learn more? How can I do this better? And as they support their employees and support and develop them, and as this is scaled across your organization, metrics will work in the way that they're intended to actually deliver on the organization's mission. So an example in the book is that it walks through new areas within performance management that need to be applied. Performance management isn't just, let's meet once a year and then give you your annual bonus. This doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't work. We need new tricks for the old dog performance management. And those new tricks are found in cognitive psychology, an area that's been around for 50, 60 years. And so what have we learned from cognitive psychology? Well, we know things like small unexpected rewards can have a much bigger impact than your once a year bonus. We also know that unfair processes, if the process seems unfair, that can affect people more than if they believe that an outcome is unfair. We also know that from our previous chapters that if we focus on strengths, if we leverage strengths, people can get jazzed up, they can get excited, it's more energy and enthusiasm because they are hitting those 3-pointers, they're getting those slam dunks, they feel like they're contributing rather than just constantly harping on weaknesses. Now think about that in a performance evaluation. They say, in a performance evaluation, say something good about someone before you drag in all the negative stuff. But that perspective is just fundamentally incorrect in a way, because the goal of that statement is essentially we want to discuss your weaknesses, so I'm going to praise you about something first, rather than let's discuss your strengths and discuss how you can get them from 95th percentile to 99th. And also here are some critical weaknesses we need to shore up. So those are two different conversations that are happening. A few other things, tapping into intrinsic motivation oftentimes draws out the very best performers. It's not just, here's an extra $1, it's getting them engaged and getting them on board with what you're trying to accomplish. There's two more. First of these is getting involvement in the process creates commitment to outcome. If you helped create something, you're more willing to defend it. And last, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is that frequent feedback is better than once a year feedback. If you don't know how you're doing for 364 days and suddenly the number, you get hit with the number, you're either a 1, 2, 3, or if your organization's 1 through 5, are you a 2 or a 4 or a 5 or a 1? You don't know when you're walking into it. That doesn't work to motivate people. They need to know along the way, hey, you're doing great. Hey, let's improve this strength even more. Hey, let's shore up that weakness. So the book focuses on 3 core ideas. The first of them is to harmonize motives, and it's basically getting step 1 right with alignment and engagement with the employee. Is that we need to harmonize the company's and the employee's motives. And ideally what we do is that we structure performance management in such a way so that it's both employer and employee centric. And what you'll find is that in cases where employer and employee-centric motives are impossible, maybe that employee is just not a good fit for the company. And that ties into, say, our previous chapters. But what do we mean by employer and employee-centric? Well, an employer wants to achieve its mission, and so an employer would like to align its direction with the employee. Well, the employee also wants to understand his or her contribution to the organization. So, well, we can, two birds with one stone. We can do this. We can tie those together. The employer wants to build capabilities within the company, and the employee wants to be killing it and hitting those home runs. Well, great. Let's leverage those strengths. The employer wants to motivate people to excel and to learn and to do better and to constantly, iteratively improve. Well, guess what? The employee wants to be recognized and rewarded. We can tie those two together. And another example from the book is that the employer wants to retain talent. It wants to retain those most highly talented performers. And the employee, well, they want to feel like they belong. Well, let's retain the employee and provide that sense of belonging. And so these are 4 examples, but we could come up with 15, 20, 100 more if we needed to, of how we can take certain motives and key desires of both the employer and the employee, and we can bind them together. The second core idea in the book is the importance of fairness, that a performance management system truly lives or dies on its actual or even its perceived fairness. This is critical, and I wanted to share a quick example of when I was responsible for creating a sales incentive plan. And there was a senior manager who had much more experience than I had in creating sales incentive plans, and he asked me what I believed was the most important aspects of a sales incentive plan. And so I walked through in all of the theoretical items that were important for a sales incentive plan. And he said, okay, all those things are great, but you're missing the fundamental step of any sales incentive program, is that the sales team needs to buy into it. They need to like it. Go get their buy-in. Does it actually motivate them? Because in the end, the purpose of a sales incentive program is to motivate humans. You're not solving a mathematical equation. And so what he taught me was that I needed to get their buy-in, get their help in structuring the program. Now, of course, a part of the sales team is going to say, pay me $1 bajillion to accomplish very little. There might be some in that organization that might say that. Of course, we can't give them anything that they want, but they need that input so that they feel like the process is fair, so that they are motivated, so that they can work hard. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. A few different other items on fairness is that you want real differentiation between your employees, but you don't want some level of false precision, like, oh, this is a 3.8 kind of person and this is a 3.6879 type of person. And when we have all the technology and numbers around us, it becomes easy to try and differentiate between two individuals when really, does that number actually translate into how much those two different individuals are contributing to the company? What is the fidelity of that number? It might not be all that high. It could be a lot fuzzier than we realize. Another aspect that's important is that the performance management is backward and forward looking. We're not just looking at the past year. We're discussing how we can develop those strengths further. How can we get people excited about the future and what we're going to achieve? That's how we're going to achieve buy-in. That's how employees are going to feel like they're connected. They have a sense of belonging with the company and they're ready to achieve what the company wants to achieve. On top of this is continuous feedback without getting so tired of these conversations. And so you have continuous feedback. You're providing that knowledge. It's not waiting the 364 days. It's every week or two, getting either formal or informal feedback provided by your manager or other people who are important in the organization that can say, hey, that was really, really good what you did there. Or here's how we can improve this strength even further. Or this was a weakness in your last project. What's the way that we can work on that so it's not an issue in the future? And so you know where you stand in the company. It's not this big question mark. Of course, in order to do that, you have to have honest two-way communication. And if that honest communication isn't happening, you're not actually getting the feedback that you actually need. Connected to this is diverse inputs. If the only thing you know about an employee is what you visually see, well, most work's being done outside of your vision in most positions, in most functions anyway. So if you only base it off of what you see, you're basing it off of a very biased lens of what these employees are achieving. So you need diverse inputs, that 360-degree feedback, and other forms of data. Another critical point is outcomes and behaviors are valued. Now, here's an example I like to use at times to illustrate this point. So let's say someone buys a lottery ticket and they win the lottery. And if you were to ask someone else, do you think that person made a sound financial decision in buying that lottery ticket? And they say, well, yeah, it was a great decision because they won. Well, no, you don't get to decide whether a decision is good or bad based off of the outcome. You need to look at the decision on the merits of the decision itself. And so if you're looking at both decisions and the outcomes, then what you can do, you can actually reward risky behaviors that the company is actually interested in taking. Now, they might not always pan out. They might frequently not pan out. Say in the case of venture capital. You're going to be losing more often than you're winning, but you can look at the decisions and the structure that you're using and tie that into performance, not just the outcomes. Now, the last area, of course, you have to have these rewards and consequences linked to this performance. Not just the outcomes, but also the decisions, as we've discussed. And we need to make the full circle so that it's understood to be fair and meaningful. Now, the final core idea is more of a warning that we need to focus on skills, not just the data and systems, because there's these new performance management systems that are out there, and it's like, there are so many shiny buttons. It's amazing. Now, data science going mainstream, which relates a lot to my background, but that combined with these sophisticated performance management systems can do some really, really cool things, but it doesn't take the place of of what managers do when they're trained appropriately in the right culture, scaled across an organization, that are developing the skills, that talent internally, so that the company is achieving its objectives. So technology can help, but the key concepts of what we're trying to accomplish, those remain the same. You're still trying to do stretch goals. You're trying to motivate. You're using honest dialogue. You're keeping your employees engaged. You're making them feel valued. You're part of this larger organization and larger mission. None of those things change. You might add some really cool machine learning algorithms to it. You might be adding some cool performance management software, but fundamentally nothing has changed. You're trying to accomplish the same things. So let's quickly recap Chapter 3 first. Performance management is very important. It's something we all recognize, but we also recognize it's not working in most places. So we need to use, say, cognitive psychology and these new tools available so that we can get each step of that performance management cycle right. And a critical part of this is to harmonize motives from employee-centric and employer-centric into one, and to create a system that is fair and is perceived to be fair.